Hello everyone. So today we are going to read and analyze an excerpt from Mahatma Gandhi's autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. So maybe many of you have heard about his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. The title itself shows about Gandhi's passion regarding truth and justice. So today we are going to study the 15th chapter of M.K. Gandhi's autobiography, which is titled as Playing the English Gentleman. So before moving on to reading the chapter and analyzing it, we should learn about what is an autobiography. So as students of literature, we should be aware about different genres and subgenres in literature. So autobiography is a non-fiction genre, and it is a form of writing which records the life of an individual by himself or herself. So if I'm writing about my life, then I can call that book as my autobiography. Okay, so but biography will be different because someone else will be writing about my book. So the term autobiography appears to have been first used by the writer Robert Southey in the year 1809. And according to Dr. Samuel Johnson, no man is better qualified to write his life than himself. But this argument can be considered as a little bit debatable, right? Because if I'm talking about my life, then definitely many things will have an influence on it. And I'll be wondering, okay, whether people will be judging me on the basis if I'm saying the truth regarding my life. So that argument by Samuel Johnson can be considered as debatable regarding autobiography. And the first ever autobiography or the book or the piece of writing which we can categorize into this genre of autobiography is Saint Augustine's Confessions from the 4th century. And it is actually an intensely personal account of spiritual experience and an extraordinary instance of deep psychological self-analysis of a kind that has become commonplace only in modern times. So during the time when Saint Augustine wrote the Confessions, it was not like regarded or it was not intended as autobiography. But later, when this genre became popular and relevant during the modern times, and when readers and thinkers started to reanalyze it, this book by Saint Augustine came to be considered or categorized into this genre of autobiography. And moving on to know about our author, father of our nation, M.K. Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, or with love and passion and enthusiasm, Indians and all over the world, people call Mahatma Gandhi as Bapu or Bapuji. So Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2nd, which is observed as Gandhi Jayanti or International Day of Non-Violence or Tolerance on October 2nd, 1869 in Gujarat, Porbandar, as the son of Karamchand Gandhi and Putli Bhai. And he was married at a very young age to Kasturba Gandhi in 1883. And Gandhi belonged to a well-off family, and so he had the privilege to go for higher education. So in 1888, he went to England to study, and he became a lawyer, a barrister in the year 1891. And then he sailed for Bombay, now Mumbai. So 1893, he accepted. So in between, he was not like really shining as a lawyer or as a barrister, and he was facing unemployment issues and job opportunities were not like really calling Mahatma Gandhi or M.K. Gandhi, then M.K. Gandhi. But later, after waiting for some time, in 1893, M.K. Gandhi accepted an offer from a firm of Muslims to represent them legally in Pretoria, the capital of Transvaal in the Union of South Africa. So that was just the beginning of this formation or evolution of this new person from Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi to Mahatma Gandhi. And he assumed leadership of the Indian National Congress in 1921. He introduced the concept of satyagraha. And all these terms, satyagraha or swaraj, are terms that is kind of like cooperated or associated with Mahatma Gandhi. And he was known for the participation and the propagation of non-cooperation movements all over India and all over the world later. So he preferred the passive form of protest over brute force and violence. So he was always against violence. And on January 30, as he was attending prayers, he was shot and killed by Nathuram Godse. So all these things we are like quite familiar with. I'm just focusing on this aspect of how he was abstaining himself from any sort of violence or any sort of protest, not active forms of protest. Like he was always preferring for passive forms of protest like satyagraha, and he was able to achieve swaraj or self-rule for India, and Indian freedom struggle for independence was kind of like under the able leadership of Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. So we can always remember MK Gandhi's journey as from a sort of like failure, as he was considering in the beginning as a very shy person, as a very quiet and shy normal person. From that level he kind of like rose into like a phoenix bird. He rose from ashes and he became the leader of our nation, father of our nation. So he was also a prolific writer, and his works had both a social and spiritual aim to fulfill. He also edited several newspapers such as Indian Opinion in South Africa, Young India, Navjeevan, and Harijan after his return to India. So his autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth, it covered the period from his childhood to his time in 1921. So it was like a larger period of his life. And from this book, we learn a lot deal about Mahatma Gandhi's life, his personal life, his choices, how he kind of like he had this evolution. So like for any individual, that's great life lessons. So to be shy or to be not like really active in classroom or in society or in community, many will be wondering, okay, what would be my life? But later we can actually take it on our lives, and we can actually take control over our lives, and we can also become leaders for our tomorrow, and we can decide our future. So that is a great life lesson that we all can learn from Mahatma Gandhi. So coming to the story of my experiments with truth, as I already mentioned, it covers his life from early childhood through to 1921. And it was actually written in weekly installments. It was appearing in journals, Navjeevan, and later in Young India. And the introduction to his autobiography was written by Gandhi himself. And so it is actually explaining about a lot about his philosophy and how his background has contributed a vital role in shaping him as the Mahatma, as we all know. So his purpose in the autobiography was to tell the truth about himself and not to write history. But even then, many historians and thinkers and writers have taken inspiration or notes or a great deal to know about India's history, the evolution, the freedom struggle, the Indian independence journey from the story of my experiments with truth. Playing the English Gentleman is the 15th chapter of M.K. Gandhi's autobiography, and he begins the chapter explaining the books that got him more deeply interested in vegetarianism. So in the previous chapters, we learn about how Gandhi was instructed by his mother to abstain himself from any sort of meat food and women and alcohol. So he was actually kind of like following this practice of abstinence, which becomes a central theme of this chapter. So that is the first major theme of the chapter, Playing the English Gentleman, abstinence, like abstaining oneself from any sort of like something, not just food, but also some practices. So he's talking in the beginning of this chapter, he's focusing on vegetarianism, and he's also quoting many books like Saul's books, Anna Kingsford's book, and so many books he's quoting, and he's explaining about how this concept or this practice of vegetarianism means a lot to him. And he moves forward describing the events followed his decision to stay a vegetarian in London. So it narrates incidents with his friend, and where his friend was really concerned about Gandhi's health, and he was saying that, okay, you have a weak composition and you will soon become a duffer and you won't be able to make any sort of judgments as his profession demands judgment. And so his friend was wondering, okay, maybe how I can draw him to become a non-vegetarian. And so his friend invited Gandhi to dine with him in the famous Holborn restaurant. So that was the first important time when Gandhi had a great chance to dine in a great restaurant, a lavish luxury restaurant. So Gandhi accepted the offer. And when they started dining, it was not just Gandhi's friend and Gandhi. So they were accompanied by a group of people. So his friend was wondering, or his friend was thinking, in fact, maybe in a group of people, Gandhi won't be much preoccupied with this concept or practice of vegetarianism. So he will be definitely having some non-veg items because he won't be able to ask any questions. But surprisingly, Gandhi, being this determined person, Gandhi called the waiter and about to ask the waiter, okay, if this, the first dish, the first serving, which was a soup, whether it is non-vegetarian or vegetarian. And suddenly his friend was calling from the other side and asking, what are you asking for? And that incident was kind of like embarrassing for, maybe definitely for Gandhi's friend, but to a certain extent for Gandhi as well. And Gandhi replied, I just want to confirm that this is a vegetarian soup. And his friend was really angry and furious, and his friend asked Gandhi to wait outside, go outside, meet me later for the theater, which they were actually planning to go after the dinner. And Gandhi, delightedly, he left the place, and he was on his way in. He saw a vegetarian restaurant nearby. But when Gandhi went to the restaurant, he could see that the vegetarian restaurant was closed. And so he decided to stay that night without any food, without any dinner. But in fact, despite all these incidents or these arguments, Gandhi and his friend had a very cordial relationship even after this embarrassing incident. So Gandhi decided that, okay, I have to make sure that my friend is content, my friend is satisfied with my stay here, and I have to make sure that I'll be a true English gentleman. So he decided to work his ways to become an English gentleman so that he fit into the London society and also his friend might feel satisfied or content. So Gandhi started grooming his clothes and accessories first, then moved on, decided to take on French lessons, because during that time, French was considered as the lingua franca or the global medium of language. And also along with that, dancing lessons and elocution lessons to fit into the London society. So that was Gandhi's plan. And his attempt to learn dance lessons went futile as he realized that he doesn't have the rhythmic motion to make the most. It should be something that comes from inside, and there should be a rhythmic motion. And Gandhi was not feeling it. And he decided to spend his money on a violin so that he will be able to have develop a certain interest in Western music. But that was also in a failure. So he appointed different teachers. So for all these things, for all these plans, he had to spend a great deal of money. So he started from sartorial practices or sartorial efforts, which means he started grooming himself by buying some evening suit and double watch gold chain from India. He asked his brother to send a gold watch, and he also made sure that he knows this art of tying a tie, because every now and then he needed that. And he started grooming his hair, and it took a long amount of time to groom himself. So he spent a lot of time in the morning in front of the mirror, which was something he was not really familiar with during his stay in India. So in London, he decided to be a London man, but all his efforts were not like exactly the point. And for his elocution lesson, his teacher asked him to read a famous work, Standard Elocutionist by Bell. And when he started reading that, he realized that, okay, I came here to study, I came here to practice something. So that should be my sole aim. I can learn all these things, whatever I need in my life, even if I'm in India. And I don't need to learn dance lessons to fit in a society, or to learn elocution lessons, or to learn or to fit into society in certain ways which are not like really acceptable to myself. So I should learn to love myself and to give some effort to make sure that I fit into the society as I prefer. So he sent letters to his teachers and asked them to relieve him from all the classes, and went to see the violin teacher personally, because he has to make sure that this violin will be taken by the teacher. And his teacher applauded the decision, and that's how MK Gandhi let go of his infatuation about becoming an English gentleman and stayed true to his ideals. And the major themes of this chapter are abstinence, as I've already said, abstaining oneself from any practices that he is considering as not like really preferable. Like in Gandhi's case, it was like abstaining himself from non-vegetarian food, alcohol, and women. And the second important theme would be conflict between Indian and Western cultural practices, which is clearly beautifully portrayed through how Gandhi's efforts became failure, because he was not like a true English gentleman, and that culture clash is visibly portrayed. And the third one would be resistance posed by the native, because as we can see, his friend, Gandhi's friend, was like really resistant about like kind of a protest mode regarding Gandhi's decision to stay as a vegetarian in England, in London. So that is also yet another theme which we can consider as as a major theme of this chapter. The 15th chapter, Playing the English Gentleman, taken from MK Gandhi's autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth. And the style and language of this chapter would be, it is essentially simple and easy to comprehend. Like the other chapters in his autobiography, the chapter has also been written in a very clear and concise manner, adding elements of humor too. So when we read this, we'll get an idea, or we can also imagine, okay, how all these practices or efforts made by MK Gandhi went futile, because he was not an English gentleman. He was an Indian who decided to stay in London society, and he can never be a true English gentleman. So that realization came to Gandhi a little while later. So thank you all for watching.